Now we're running a little bit over, so we're going to trim this session accordingly. But we do actually have a video that Anne-Marie sent in that we're going to start with, just a 4-minute video, and then I'll be joined by these two lovely people on the stage.
I'm going to start off with one question. So what do you think is the point of mathematics? Because sometimes I turn up to schools, I give a talk and somebody puts their hand up and saying, yeah, what is the point of mathematics? So in your view, what is the point of mathematics?
In my view, mathematics is, there's so many points to maths, right? Like the point of maths, there's joy in maths, there's beauty in maths. I think the point of maths in a lot of spaces is to help with understanding and help with communication about life, right? And the world as we see it. The point of maths also can be to understand patterns or identify patterns. The point of maths can be often actually to solve problems, much to some people's chagrin, but a lot of people's kind of joy and delight. Maths allows us to communicate, as I've said already, understand shape and space. There's many, I don't know if there's a point of maths. I think there are points of maths. And actually for everybody, there's several points of maths that overlap with what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve, what your purpose is. So I don't know. That's a big question to start off with.
Oh, well, I'm sorry. This is almost like saying, this is almost like the mathematical version of question time.
Yeah.
And I am doing that, I'm going to throw in like those curveballs. Do you go? There's the curveballs, and let's see you answer them. There you go. So all good. So that's interesting. I mean, because I remember I was speaking to somebody one time and saying, it's not so much about what is the point of maths, it's what is the range of mathematics. And that's interesting in your career. So why did you decide not to go into academia? Very, very succinctly, you got about 30 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, really, really, really quickly, I think there were a couple of different things that I had that are still things that I'm kind of working through and battling at the moment. So I think there's definitely something of feeling completely at home in the academic space was not necessarily something that I saw for myself or even necessarily associated. And my academics were lovely, and I'm still, in touch with them. I'm honorary fellow back at Keble College still, to this day, and get to engage with folks and all the rest of it. But I think I definitely... I wasn't sure that I would fully fit in and be fully, truly appreciated and have, and I don't know, be fully, respected to the max, really, if I was going to stay in an academic space. And I think it's still something that we're grappling with now. If we look at Black female professors across the UK, if we look at Black professors, across STEM and in other places, the experiences, the pay, the proportion, all of that, there's still a lot of work to be done. And I love to be in places I'm going to be celebrated rather than tolerated. But I think the other thing was this idea of, wanting to see impact fairly quickly. And I think with what I saw in academia versus what I saw in industry, I felt like I could get to it quicker in industry. And a main theme in my life has always been do things quickly. It's kind of just the way that I'm kind of living at pace and doing things quickly. But I think it's something that looking back, I don't regret stepping into industry because there's so much that I have learned by getting to see those applications of maths. I went into banking, so I got to see, quite a lot of that. Was really happy actually to see, partial differential equations actually being used and deployed in the real world, which is not something I imagined when we were going through lectures. And so I think for me, it's been really nice to look at industry, be in entrepreneurship, and then dip my toe every now and then back into academic spaces to get to understand, what that reality could be, what needs to be changed. And if it's not me as that maths professor, or that computer science professor, what are we doing to ensure that, the newer version or better versions of me are able to come in and thrive as academics in particular spaces. And so, we almost met at the Maths Summit earlier this year, and that's one of the things we're talking about. But I think it is imperative that we can and we do encourage, and we're conscious about how inclusive and how much we are supporting different types of people to succeed on academic pathways. And it's not something purely about mathematics, actually. It's the wider academia and academic space, but how we're ensuring that actually that pursuit of knowledge is not drowned out by political and social and ethical and other kind of norms that end up getting in the way, that we almost ignore because we say we're STEM and we're maths and it's just about the maths. It's like, well, no, how are you, operating in that research group? What is the environment that you're curating? How are you relating to different types of students that are coming, with different types of ideas and have different types of priorities, or maybe have explored different types of curriculums and like different parts of maths to what you like.
Anne-Marie, what happened? Nira there. Taking on the mantle of Fiona Bruce. By Okay. Well, I guess I'm going to start. I'm going to start by asking you that same question. I mean, the difficult one that you began with. What is the point of maths to you as an individual?
As an individual, okay. As for me as an individual, like I said in a previous session, is that everybody's mathematical journey is unique to them. You know, for me, mathematics is about solving problems in an innovative, creative, logical way. I heard that there was a say that mathematics is the poetry of logical ideas. And if you dig down deep enough into anything, you will find mathematics. That's my personal definition of what is the point of mathematics.
Right, follow that. So I'm Kathy Hobbs. I'm a professor of maths and maths education at Bristol, and I'm the IMA's Honorary Secretary for Education. Also lead on policy for the Academy. So that's a little bit of my, and a bunch of other things, yeah. But yeah, what is the point for me? I watched this video last night. I thought, I bet that's the question that we're going to be asked to think about. So I thought about it. So, I mean, it's what Nira says. Mathematics is the language of nature, right? It's the language that describes everything around us. And so ultimately, that is the point. For me personally, mathematics is the subject that really clicks me when I understand something. Everything clicks into place and everything becomes clear. And you get a deep sense of understanding that I don't get from any other subject. I was talking earlier to a couple of people over coffee and said that perhaps there is an analogy in music. If you're in an ensemble or listening to an ensemble playing music together and they're all in tune and in rhythm and they know what they're doing, it's that same feeling. And I don't get that from anything else. So for me, that's the point.
So pretending I'm Fiona Bruce. So, Hannah, what is the point of mathematics?
Fiona, you look much more friendly than the last time I saw you. Okay, so I really like your description there. Andrew Wiles has this description, I'm sure many of you have heard of it, but where he says that when you're struggling with a proof, when you're struggling with a kind of mathematical problem, it's a bit like kind of traveling through like a jungle or brushland, right? You can't see where anything is. You've got no idea. You know, you're sort of like really confused about in every direction that you turn, whether it's the right direction, wrong direction. And then there will be, if you're lucky, one day, one single moment where you turn a corner and immediately see yourself in this beautifully landscaped garden where everything is absolutely perfect and no one has been there before you, and yet you can see all of the symmetry, all of the beauty, all of the incredible, intricate design almost of it. And I think that's the reason why the phrase I like the most is sometimes people call maths the portal to the playground for the soul, right? And I love that. I love that. I mean, as an applied mathematician, I think that the things that Anne-Marie was talking about there, you know, the sort of use of it, for me, it feels like, as an applied mathematician, it's like you get to look at the cheat sheet of the world, right? That's how it feels to me. But I'll never get over that visual description that Andrew Wiles gives of garden.
The portal to the soul.
Yeah, exactly. Playground for the soul.
The playground for the soul.
Yeah, exactly.
Would you like to elaborate on that?
The portal to the playground for the soul. Actually, I wanted to ask you guys, I mean, can you tell that we haven't really prepped questions for this fireside chat? Don't know if that's obvious. It was the end of the day. We figured you'd all be asleep. Okay, I want to ask you questions about maths anxiety, though, because I thought that everything that was being said in those sessions, in the session before, was super fascinating. Do you ever suffer from it yourself? And have you found ways in your in students or people who you mentor to mitigate it? Actually, I don't know. Do you guys have kids? Are you good at like not? I thought when I had kids, I was like, this is going to be easy. Honestly, it's my eldest daughter. It's like I don't know if you've seen the dad math meme, But essentially, it's where a dad is trying to teach maths to their children and just increasingly gets frustrated and frustrated and frustrated and eventually explodes. And that is basically what it looks like me trying to teach my daughter. Do you have the same experience?
Well, my children are now grown up. I've now got empty nest syndrome. My eldest, he's a game artist, and he was doing all this drawing, let's say, computer games and cars, and doing something. And I said, "Oh, do you use maths?" And he said, "No, I don't do maths." I said, "What do you do next?" "I use this thing called splines, and that's got nothing to do with mathematics." I said, "Yes, Daddy, that's got nothing to do with mathematics." And with my youngest, he's cybersecurity officer for a law firm, so he can at least admit that he does some parts of mathematics. But, is there a challenge? Because sometimes when people actually, think, said, "Oh, your dad's a mathematician, so henceforth it must be something in your DNA." No, it's not. There's still that practice. As for me, do I suffer from maths anxiety? If I do, I don't recognise it, because I always see a problem and I always think, is there a way? And there's always a way. And there's always a way. Either in my head, in the notes, on the internet, there's always a way. But, I recognise that when students are suffering from maths anxiety, I have to show that compassion to get them through, as opposed to saying, get over it. Because what I don't want to do is I don't want to enrage the maths anxiety, believing that this stuff is easy and you should be able to answer it. No, I have to be there, sympathetic, and taking them that journey to take them through that maths anxiety and show them that actually there is a way.
So I've got 2 kids, and the oldest absolutely rebelled and didn't want to have anything to do with maths. And my husband's also a mathematician. So we just took a step back and said, okay, we're not going to push maths. I slightly regretted it. I wondered if I should have made more of a point of it. But, she's trod her own path and she's very happy. She has had to do some statistics in her degree and got through it somehow. And then my son, completely to our surprise, turned out to love maths, having not applied himself at all until A-levels, and he's just started a maths degree. So I feel I've had one success, but you're right. It's very difficult to force your children to do anything at all, and you just have to let them do what they want to do. Yeah. Yeah. So do the maths anxiety bit first. So do I get maths anxiety? For sure, all the time. I sit in many research seminars and think, I have no clue what these people are talking about. But I've been there before and I know it's okay. So I think it's that understanding that that's kind of normal and I shouldn't worry about it. As a graduate student, I thought it was terrifying that I didn't understand everything that every seminar speaker said. And then gradually came to understand that that was okay. So yeah, I've just made peace with it, I think.
Comfortable with being uncomfortable. Yeah, that's certainly how I find it.
But how to help other people. So I spend a lot of time obviously working with students. I teach students all the time, and even maths students definitely have maths anxiety, particularly around proof. That's a real area where they struggle a lot, in my experience. And I spend a lot of time showing them behind the curtain and saying that actually you read this on the textbook and it looks as if it's perfect and beautifully presented. That's not how maths comes out of my head. It's a mess and a jumble, and I spent ages tidying it up and making it digestible for you. It's not how it really is. Alan yesterday gave a brilliant session to my students about how you present mathematics and how it's the voice of mathematics helps them, the voice you use to describe mathematics. So in a mathematical paper where you're trying to be an incredibly clever person, you present it in one way. If you're trying to encourage your students, you talk about how we do things together and bring them through it. And I think I do a lot of that with my students, trying to show them behind the curtain. It's not as tidy as it looked. Don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of proof in particular.
I wanted to say a couple of things, if I may. So the first, I really like your story about splines, right? Amazing. It reminds me, I have a very, very good friend who's a graphic designer who was continually telling me that maths was pointless. And then one day he was teaching me how to do something and he was like, this is called a Gaussian blur. It's like, okay. sit down. Let me tell you a story. Yes, but just I really love how it pops up and the feeling of smugness. Just the point that you make though about the language that you use when you're teaching people. I was really I was thinking earlier on when I can't remember who was saying it. Someone was talking about the example of dating apps and how you get into. Oh, there we go, perfect. Oh, there you go. Sorry, I was hiding behind there. I couldn't see. I love that idea, right? I really love that idea. And I have to say that is that sort of technique of framing something as something completely different and letting the maths be the kind of second part of the story. That is absolutely the tactic that I go for every single time. I mean, I think Joe said earlier that the very first thing that you should do when you encounter an audience is not make it about yourself, right? And I think that includes not making it necessarily about the thing that you want to teach them, right? I think that the most effective communication, and I include teaching here, is when you go to where the audience is first. So I think if you do have a group of young students and you're like, right, okay, let's optimize our chart, on a dating profile. Or for my kids, for example, sitting down and getting them to do maths homework is a nightmare. However, I can very easily get them to work out an optimal route to the park, or to sort out, jam jars and lids, and work out, based on like kind of an estimation on volume size based on circumference, like that kind of stuff. Easy peasy. And I think that it is partly not just about the we language. I think it's partly about motivation. And I think that the best possible time to get mathematical ideas to be really engaged with by people is when they feel as though the maths ideas are the key that they need to unlock the next stage of the puzzle, right? That I think is the really crucial thing, and it's very, very difficult. And it really brings us back to what people were saying earlier about teaching, and about how essential really good teachers are, because I think that it has to happen the entire way across. Should we let the audience ask questions, seeing as we've got no questions for each other? We'll let you ask. We'll let you ask 2 questions, and then we'll go and have some reception downstairs. There's one here. One here.
Probably it's not a question, but topic for discussion. Earlier, mathematics was compared with language, and in some sense, those who know hardcore mathematics, they're like medieval scribers who know every sign and how to write every letter. And those who are joining mathematics now, they're operating kind of Lego blocks, sometimes not even understanding behind who was Gauss, for example. And they perfectly solve the problems. My concern is that sometimes when they don't understand mathematics, they just bring together incompatible Lego blocks. And it's not always, they can even interpret results properly. So they speak certain language, put in wrong order of words, and probably using the wrong choice of words. And their language is a little strange. But we cannot ask everybody to be etymologist and understand all the syntaxis rules. So maybe, is this the future of mathematics? When people will be taking blocks without knowing how they are made, what they are made of, forgetting about even notation, just taking Python package, another Python package, and this is the future of mathematics. That's my question.
Okay, so I think on the one hand here, I'm really thinking about the whole Hilbert thing, right? Like the axiomatic idea of mathematics and whether it can be built from these fundamental principles upward, and then of course the Gödel idea that it's not possible. But somehow or other, even though we had in sort of the professional mathematical space have had that realization that building upwards doesn't work, you have to actually have this much more fluid, much more language-like approach to it, of kind of going through different parts of it simultaneously. At the same time, I do think that when it comes to teaching, we are still really stuck to that, you've got to learn the grammar first, right? And I do see why you have to learn the grammar first, but I don't necessarily understand why you have to learn the grammar and not be able to learn the stories at the same time. Like English, for instance, is taught with English language and English literature, because otherwise nobody would want to study English, right? Because it would just be horrendous. And so in terms of what you're saying then about the future of mathematics, I mean, I know that we keep coming back to this same idea of like of school education being the kind of wrong approach, but I do really think that it's where the problems arise is that then when people find really exciting stories or really exciting questions later in life, right? They're working as data scientists or alongside data scientists, they find some really interesting question about people or whatever, because they don't understand that those questions that they're asking are really mathematical questions. They just, I think, look for tools that will fill in the gaps. I don't think people have respect for the kind of deep underlying principles of this stuff, because it's like, it's sort of seen as though the mathematical grammar is an optional extra that sort of lives in a dusty textbook over there, and you kind of don't need to worry about it at all. I am a little bit concerned about increasingly statistics particularly being used without really a deep understanding of what's going on behind the scenes. And that, I think, actually is one of the reasons why we were talking earlier about rebranding maths as a different name. I think I agree with you. Don't worry, Chris. I'm not going to. That's one of the reasons why I think that we shouldn't, actually, because I think that there is something really fundamental about the training of a mathematician, the formal training of a mathematician and a statistician, which I think is kind of unshakable and shouldn't be kind of moved around based on the current trends. And so, I am concerned about our subject being used and misused. And as for what to do to it, I mean, I think the only answer is more maths, right? But different maths.
Okay, I'm going to come from this in a little bit different angle. One of the aspects of mathematics is this whole idea of doing a thought experiment, So if people thinking that, we can just solve these problems without a thought experiment and be good like that. Because I can use the analogy of when my boys were teenagers. If I took them to Euston and took away their mobile phones and says, okay, walk, here's the A to Z map, and walk to Buckingham Palace, they wouldn't be able to do that. Because what we've done is that we actually thrown the baby out with the bathwater. Now, as mathematicians, we should have this fundamental skill of thought experiment. Man, like say Laplace in the 18th century, he ran out in the street and says, out there in space there exists a phenomenon that not even light can escape from it. And unbelievably, he actually, without a computer, without a satellite, without anything, he actually, in a way, theoretically discovered the existence of a black hole, through thought experiment. I know that was somebody who had that experiment before him, but that shows the principles of mathematics, and that same principle that I use in my job day in and day out. When there's machine learning fails, when there's data science fails, what does it fail? The thought experiment. And that is a fundamental for mathematics, and it will be fundamental for mathematics yesterday, it will be fundamental for mathematics today, and it will be fundamental for mathematics tomorrow.
I'm not sure my answer will have much, but just to take Hannah's point about how you talked just now about how you introduce something and then the students realise they need maths to get to the next level. So that's that exact entwining. You don't have to do the dry stuff first before you tell any of the stories. You could do them together. And I think that's so I've worked quite a lot in the engineering space, and that's in engineering education, there's a really big move towards not just giving the dry material first, but actually combining the two. And so that students see a need suddenly to go to that next bit of mathematics. And I think there's a potential real big future for maths there. You might be aware that there's a funding available at the moment through the Campaign for Mathematical Sciences for people to propose brand new maths degrees and get quite a large chunk of money to redevelop their degree. And I think there's a lot of mileage when looking what's going on in engineering and see if we could do the same kind of thing in maths. It's transformed some areas of engineering education. So I think we could do the same.
Okay, so it's this initiative. It's for primary school students, and it's the idea that, like, okay, actually, you kind of do need a bit of repetitive practice to be able to pick up on some of these early concepts. But repetitive practice when you're sat down at a desk is really very difficult. Whereas if you turn it into a game, so it's this amazing mathematician called Gavin Mayer, who was like very close to being in the Olympics as an 800-meter runner, and he has set it up where he just has all these games where it's like you're looking, you're solving a sum, but you're like looking for a particular thing, and you've got to run over and put it in a basket, and then you're kind of together in teams where some people are sportier, some people are maybe more mathematically minded, but it just turns the whole thing into like, I don't know, just actual fun, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and just to add to that is one of the organisations, one of the charities I work for, is they fundamentally look at working with primary school children and using mathematics as an experimental science. So instead of being totally rote, doing all these different types of experiments and saying mathematics as an experimental science is another way of actually looking at mathematics, throwing a die and seeing what patterns actually emerge. So I won't go.